July 10th, 2026. 2 days ago, something happened over the eastern skies of Iran that most of the world missed entirely. And the people who did notice it understood immediately what it meant. Multiple aircraft departed from Marabad airport with their transponders switched completely off. No tracking signals. No flight identification codes broadcasting to regional air traffic control. No publicly visible destination. Just planes in the air, moving east at speed, vanishing from commercial flight tracking systems, as if they had never taken off at all. They were running. Not metaphorically, not diplomatically. Not in the rhetorical sense that analysts use when they describe adversaries withdrawing from a confrontation. Literally airborne, transponders dark, moving fast and silently toward the bunker infrastructure near Mashhad, the northeastern corner of Iran, as far from the Strait of Hormuz, as far from every known coastal military installation, and as far from every identified American strike corridor as you can physically travel while remaining inside Iranian territory. And the fact that Iranian leadership is now airborne, headed toward hardened underground positions in the middle of an active military confrontation, tells you something that no press conference, no carefully worded denial from Tehran, no statement from either government communicates with the same clarity. The regime believes the next wave of American strikes is coming. And they believe it is going to be substantially heavier than everything that has already landed. That single operational detail, aircraft, no transponders, eastbound, bunker-bound, is the frame through which everything else unfolding right now must be understood. But let us back all the way up, because to understand what happened over those skies on July 8th, you need to understand what has been building for weeks, what decisions were made before the first strike ever landed, and why the military, financial, and psychological pressure converging on Tehran right now in the summer of 2026 is not an accident of timing. It is the product of a deliberate strategic architecture executing on a defined sequence of actions, each one designed to compound the effect of the one before it. The foundational strategic decision that produced everything you're watching right now began with a break from the approach that characterized American policy toward Iran for the better part of 5 decades. Every previous administration, across multiple parties and across dramatically different geopolitical contexts, operated on some variation of the same essential framework. Apply economic pressure through sanctions, engage diplomatically when Tehran shows any willingness to negotiate, contain the military dimension through deterrence and proxy counter-pressure, and this is the critical part, avoid direct kinetic confrontation with the Iranian state itself on its own territory. That framework produced the nuclear agreement, produced multiple rounds of negotiations that went nowhere, produced the careful calibration of red lines that were announced and then quietly abandoned, and ultimately produced a situation where Iran spent decades developing its military capability, expanding its regional proxy network from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq, advancing its nuclear program in stages, and absorbing economic pressure while never facing the single thing it had never been exposed to: sustained, direct American military strikes on Iranian soil, Iranian military infrastructure, and Iranian leadership. The current administration changed that calculation. The decision, and from the publicly available record, it was a deliberate and sequenced decision rather than a reactive moment, was to strike directly, to strike repeatedly, and to target not just physical military infrastructure, but the human beings who commanded it, who sat above it in the chain of authority, and who constituted the decision-making capacity of the Iranian military and political structure. The practical effect of that decision is the operational picture that is unfolding in real time as of today, July 10th, 2026. Iranian air defense networks destroyed, radar facilities rebuilt, and then destroyed again before reconstitution was complete. Naval installations at Bandar Abbas and Bushehr struck with confirmed military casualties. Leadership tiers eliminated at the most senior levels, and a surviving Iranian command structure now dispersed underground across the northeastern part of the country, trying to govern an active military confrontation from a position of genuine structural defensive desperation. Here is where the confirmed operational picture actually stands right now, in hard numbers and name locations, sourced entirely from confirmed official statements and verified reporting. The U.S. Central Command released footage this week showing a minimum of 20 American warships conducting coordinated exercises in the Middle East theater simultaneously. Not sequentially, not in rotation. 20 ships operating at the same time, in the same operational zone, with fighter aircraft, including F-35s airborne from carrier flight decks, early warning and control aircraft, maintaining continuous airborne surveillance coverage over the entire operational area, and multiple carrier groups visible in the same footage. The scale of what CENTCOM released is not a diplomatic signal designed to suggest that America might be serious about something. It is a demonstration staged by a military that is already executing, already positioned, and wants the adversary's leadership, and the leadership's military commanders, to see the full scope of what is arrayed against them before the next decision gets made. Above that naval posture, the refueling tanker activity over the Mediterranean is its own story. And it is a story being told in the flight patterns of aircraft that do not carry weapons and do not make headlines. Refueling tankers do not fly continuous loops over the Mediterranean for their own operational purposes. They fly continuous loops because the aircraft they are servicing need fuel at altitude on the way to somewhere specific. When you track tanker activity over the Mediterranean trending south toward the Middle East, the operational implication is unambiguous to anyone who has spent serious time watching military aviation patterns. Bombers and fighter jets are moving with those tankers, moving in the direction the tankers are positioned to support, and the direction is toward the Gulf. The Iranian air defense planners who are still alive and still operational know this dynamic perfectly. They know that when the tankers are looping, the aircraft moving with them are not going to an exercise, and they know that there is no part of Iranian territory, not the east, not the northwest, not the hardened bunker regions near Mashhad, that the air power currently positioned in this theater cannot reach. The Iranian army itself, in this detail, carries its own weight because Tehran does not confirm American military successes unless it has no other option. Acknowledged the strikes on July 8th at Bandar Abbas and Bushehr, two of Iran's most strategically significant naval and air force positions on its southern coast. The confirmed death toll from those two locations stands at 8 Iranian military personnel. 8 confirmed dead. Beyond those casualties, the radar infrastructure that Iranian forces had been laboriously rebuilding after earlier strikes, and which had reached approximately 60% of its pre-strike operational capability, was, according to Trump's own direct statement, completely reset to zero in a single night strike cycle. Read that again. Because the strategic weight embedded in that specific detail is precisely what most of the mainstream coverage has not fully absorbed. The significance is not simply the destruction of physical radar infrastructure. It is the confirmation that the American strike campaign is operating on a timeline that does not allow Iranian reconstitution to reach completion. The Iranians are not being granted the standard dynamic of absorbing a strike, rebuilding over months, and then facing another strike after an interval long enough to recover. They are being struck, beginning to rebuild, and being struck again before the rebuild reaches operational capability. This is the operational logic of a sustained degradation campaign, and it is fundamentally different from a punitive strike campaign in ways that matter enormously for understanding where this ends. A punitive strike is designed to change behavior by demonstrating that specific actions carry an unacceptably high cost. A sustained degradation campaign is designed to eliminate the adversary's capacity to function as a military power at all, regardless of whether behavior changes. The distinction carries a profoundly different implied endpoint. Punishment ends when behavior changes. Degradation ends when capability is gone. And here's where the story moves into territory that the headline coverage has largely refused to address directly. On July 8th, Trump did not simply discuss what had already been struck. He explicitly described what has not yet been struck but exists inside the American target set. He stated that the United States has the capacity to destroy every single bridge in Iran in a single day. He identified Iranian electrical manufacturing facilities and power generation infrastructure as confirmed targets that have been deliberately withheld. He mentioned desalination plants, facilities that provide drinking water to a population of more than 80 million people, as options on the table, adding that he would prefer not to strike them, but that the capability and the decision to use it exist. He framed each of these not as threats designed to compel Iranian behavioral change, but as options already targeted, already planned against, already assigned to strike packages. The distinction is crucial. A threat is a conditional statement. Do X, or we will do Y. What Trump described as a target list. Y already exists, the strike package is ready, and the decision not to execute it is a choice that can be reversed on any given night. That framing, the infrastructure of 80 million civilian lives described as a set of options rather than a set of red lines, landed in Tehran as something qualitatively different from any previous American statement about Iran. Every Iranian official still functioning in a decision-making capacity has now heard the American president describe the country's bridges, power grid, and water supply as reserved target sets that have been withheld as a matter of preference rather than capability. The implication is not subtle. What has been withheld can be executed, and the decision not to execute it is not permanent. This is the information that the people on those transponder-off aircraft were carrying in their heads when they boarded their planes and turned east. Now let us talk about the specific military hardware in this theater, because the platforms involved in this campaign are not incidental details. They are strategic choices that carry meaning beyond their technical specifications, and in several cases, the choice of platform is itself a message directed at Tehran's remaining decision-makers. The F-35 operating from a carrier deck in the Gulf is not the same asset as an F-35 operating from a land base in uncontested airspace. Flying from a carrier in the operational zone means the aircraft launches and immediately enters an environment where Iranian ballistic missiles, shore-based anti-ship systems, and drone swarms all represent active threat vectors. But the F-35's defining advantage in this context is not its low observable profile, though that matters critically against degraded but not eliminated air defenses. It is the aircraft's sensor fusion architecture, its ability to simultaneously integrate data from its own sensors, from other platforms in the battlespace, and from space and airborne intelligence assets, then present the pilot with a synthesized operational picture that older generation aircraft simply cannot replicate. In a target environment as complex as southern Iran right now, where air defenses are degraded but not eliminated, where drone threats can emerge from multiple directions with minimal warning, and where the Iranian command structure is fragmented and making unpredictable decisions from underground facilities, that sensor fusion capability represents an asymmetric operational advantage that cannot be compensated for by any countermeasure available to Iranian forces. The refueling tanker fleet enabling the sustained tempo of this campaign is itself an underappreciated operational enabler. A tanker orbiting over the Mediterranean is unglamorous. It does not generate strike footage. It does not produce the imagery that makes news cycles. But what it enables is continuous offensive air power projection over distances and sortie durations that would otherwise be operationally impossible. A heavy bomber or a fully loaded strike fighter has a finite unrefueled range that would impose geographic constraints on where targets can be struck and how long aircraft can remain on station. Aerial refueling eliminates those constraints. The tanker fleet currently operating in this theater means American strike aircraft can reach any point in Iranian territory, strike precisely, loiter as needed over the target area, and return, without any geographic sanctuary existing for the target. There is no safe distance. There is no part of Iran that falls outside the operational reach of what is currently airborne. Then there is Kharg Island and the specific combination of platforms now positioned in its proximity. The USS Boxer is an amphibious assault ship. Its function is not deterrence in the abstract sense. It carries the personnel, the equipment, the vehicles, and the operational doctrine of a United States Marine Expeditionary Unit designed for one purpose: seizing and holding territory. The Boxer does not carry Marines as a symbolic gesture. It carries Marines because Marines are the instrument through which a defended island gets taken by force. And the USS Boxer is now positioned alongside the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with its full embarked air wing and strike group, which provides the air superiority framework and the strike capability over Kharg Island and the surrounding Gulf waters that would be required to protect an amphibious landing force from the missile and drone response that Iranian forces would launch the moment boots hit the beach. You do not move an amphibious assault ship with a Marine Expeditionary Unit next to an aircraft carrier strike group, position both of them near an island whose infrastructure has been deliberately and explicitly spared from destruction, have the President of the United States tell reporters you might take that island, and then stand down because of diplomatic sensitivities. The assets are there. The statement has been made. The Marine Corps does not deploy on amphibious assault ships as a metaphor. Trump's framing of Kharg Island during his comments on July 8th was precise in a way that deserves to be stated without softening. 95% of Iran's oil exports flow through Kharg Island. Not a majority, not most. 95%. The entire financial architecture sustaining the Islamic Republic of Iran, the military budget, the salaries for Revolutionary Guard personnel, the funding that flows to Hezbollah in Lebanon, to Houthi forces in Yemen, to militia networks throughout Iraq, to every component of the regional proxy infrastructure that Tehran spent decades constructing, and that constitutes the regime's primary mechanism of regional power projection. Every dollar of that funding is traceable back to oil revenue, and 95% of that revenue flows through a single island currently under American air attack, with its oil infrastructure deliberately preserved, with an amphibious assault ship carrying Marines sitting close enough to see the smoke. The strategic logic is not complicated. It is, in fact, unusually transparent for an operation of this magnitude. If Kharg is taken, the Iranian economy does not weaken gradually over a period of months, as the standard pressure campaign playbook would suggest. It stops. The financial foundation of the regime's military and political power ends on the day American forces establish operational control of the island's export infrastructure. There is no alternative export route that could compensate for the sudden disappearance of 95% of capacity in any time frame that would allow the regime to function. The government that depended on that revenue faces an immediate and unsurvivable fiscal crisis, while simultaneously prosecuting an active military conflict against a force that has already destroyed its air defense network, killed 2 tiers of its senior leadership, and can put aircraft over any point in its territory on any given night. Now let us go inside the Iranian command architecture, because what is actually happening inside Tehran's decision-making structure right now, who is making decisions, from where, with what information, and under what psychological conditions, is the part of this story that the mainstream coverage is almost entirely failing to address. Trump's comment about leadership tiers on July 8th was delivered almost as an aside, but it contains operational intelligence significance that requires unpacking. He described a tiered leadership structure in which Level 1 is gone, Level 2 is gone, and Level 3, the people currently nominally in charge of the Iranian government and its military, he suggested may also be gone in the near future. Then he made an observation that was more revealing than it initially appeared. He said he got to know them, and that is why his description of them changed from rational and capable to scum. The casual delivery obscures the operational weight of what he was saying. He was describing a process of sustained contact with successive Iranian leadership tiers across a period of active military engagement, during which each tier was removed and replaced before the next tier became the relevant counterpart. The human and institutional cost embedded in that description is enormous. When you remove a government's senior leadership tier, you do not simply create a vacancy that gets filled by the next most capable person, while everything else continues functioning normally. You disrupt the entire institutional knowledge base of the organization. The people who understood the full picture, who had the personal relationships with Hezbollah's senior commanders, who knew the actual status of the nuclear program's most sensitive components, who carried the institutional memory of 47 years of strategic decisions and their consequences, who understood which proxy force commanders could be trusted with what kinds of orders and which could not, those people are gone. The people who replaced them are operating with partial information, incomplete institutional networks, and the acute psychological awareness that they are now the tier that has been publicly identified as potentially next. The flight of Level 3 officials toward the bunker regions near Mashhad is not merely a physical relocation. It is a command fragmentation event with consequences that extend far beyond the geography of who is where. When leadership is concentrated in a functioning capital, coordination is operationally straightforward. Communication channels are established, encrypted, and reliable. Decisions can be made with input from the full group of relevant decision makers who share the same operational picture. When leadership disperses underground across geographically separated hardened facilities in the northeastern part of the country, coordination becomes exponentially more difficult. Every communication channel becomes a potential intelligence vulnerability. Decision-making fragments into smaller groups operating with different information sets, making decisions based on different operational pictures, potentially issuing orders that contradict each other because the people issuing them cannot fully synchronize in real time. This is command fragmentation in its operational form. And it is one of the most dangerous conditions a military organization can inhabit, not because a fragmented command makes the organization more effective militarily, but because it makes the organization deeply unpredictable. Unpredictable in a context where the organization still has an active missile inventory, still maintains notional command authority over proxy forces spread across the region, and where officials have publicly called for bombs to fall on a NATO summit venue while the president who ordered the strikes on them was physically present. And then there is the kill list confirmation, which is the detail that ties the entire picture together in a way that no operational briefing and no satellite image can replicate. On July 8th, Trump was asked about the Iranian kill list during a press availability, and his answer did not involve the careful hedging and qualified language that characterizes how administrations normally discuss active threats to the president's life. He stated directly, "He is number one on the kill list for Iran." He said it is out all over the place. He acknowledged the danger with the specific framing of a man who has processed the information and decided to proceed anyway. "I don't really care because I'm doing my job." He also mentioned the statistic that 5.2% of presidents do not survive their tenure, said it was a dangerous profession, and made the observation with a tone that conveyed neither panic nor denial, but something closer to the deliberate calm of someone who has been briefed on a real threat and chosen not to let it alter his operational posture. That is not a performance. That is a man describing a threat he believes is real and explaining why he has decided to accept the risk rather than change course. The behavioral evidence around the kill list confirmation supports the verbal statement in ways that are harder to spin. The aircraft used for presidential travel since this threat environment developed is reported to be the older Air Force One variant rather than the newly commissioned replacement. Specifically, according to reporting at the time, because the older aircraft carries superior defensive countermeasures, more capable electronic warfare suites, and hardened defensive systems designed for an environment in which an adversary with surface-to-air capability might attempt to engage the presidential aircraft in flight. You do not choose to fly the defensively superior older aircraft over the newer, more prestigious replacement unless the threat environment justifies the operational calculus. That choice is its own confirmation. The people who make those decisions do not substitute an older aircraft for a newer one as a matter of aesthetics. They do it because the threat picture demands it. The Iranian government, in the same time frame, produced the statement about the NATO summit venue. That statement about the NATO summit deserves its own examination. Iranian officials calling publicly for the NATO summit venue to be struck while Trump was present is not a statement that sits comfortably inside any conventional framework of state behavior. even adversarial state behavior. It is not a negotiating posture. It is not a calculated escalation designed to produce a specific diplomatic outcome. Striking a NATO summit with the American president in attendance would constitute an act of war against the United States, and simultaneously invoke Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, bringing the collective military capability of every NATO member into active conflict with Iran. The Iranian military, in its current degraded state, cannot survive a conventional military engagement with the United States alone. The concept of fighting the full NATO alliance simultaneously is not a military strategy. It is a statement made by an institution that has lost its capacity for coherent strategic calculation, or a statement made deliberately to convey that the calculation has been abandoned. Either interpretation should produce deep concern in anyone analyzing this situation seriously. Now let us address the three simultaneous pressure tracks operating against the Iranian regime in July 2026, because understanding each of them in isolation is not sufficient. The strategic reality of this moment only becomes fully visible when you see how they converge, and more importantly, how the convergence produces effects that no single track could generate independently. The military pressure track is the most visible and the most reported. Strikes on air defense networks, radar facilities rebuilt and destroyed in successive cycles, naval installations at Bandar Abbas and Bushehr struck with confirmed casualties. 8 Iranian military personnel confirmed dead at the 2 strike locations. Fighter jets and bombers repositioning through the Mediterranean corridor. 20-plus warships operating simultaneously in the Gulf theater. F-35s airborne from carrier decks. The USS Boxer and Abraham Lincoln in position for a potential Kharg Island operation. This track is generating the physical destruction and the leadership casualties that are forcing the bunker evacuations and driving the command fragmentation. It is real, it is sustained, and the operational tempo visible from open source tracking alone suggests it is accelerating rather than pausing between cycles. The financial pressure track operates with less immediacy, but carries potentially more decisive long-term consequences. Every day that American military power operates in proximity to the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Gulf energy infrastructure, Iranian oil shipping faces a risk environment that translates directly into reduced revenue and reduced confidence in Tehran's ability to guarantee export continuity. Every day that Kharg Island exists under the explicit threat of American seizure rather than under uncontested Iranian control, the insurance and logistics costs associated with Iranian oil exports increase, the willingness of purchasing nations to commit to long-term contracts decreases, and the regime's ability to translate its resource base into functional government revenue degrades. If Kharg is taken, and the assets to take it are positioned, this financial track does not merely apply pressure. It eliminates the revenue foundation that the regime's survival depends on, not gradually, not over years, immediately. The psychological pressure track is the dimension that official analysis almost never addresses directly because it resists quantification, but it is operating at an intensity in this specific situation that is genuinely without modern precedent. The President of the United States is publicly confirming, on camera in front of journalists, that he is number 1 on an Iranian kill list. Then he says he does not care because he is doing his job. He is calling Iranian leadership scum in the same breath that he describes their leaders as gone, going, and possibly about to be gone again. He is talking about taking their most valuable island the same way you might discuss a routine business decision. The asymmetry of psychological posture between the two sides is as dramatic as the asymmetry of military capability. One side is flying its officials to underground bunkers with transponders off. The other side is talking to reporters about island seizure and kill lists and infrastructure targets with the tone of a man describing a renovation project. When all 3 of those tracks operate simultaneously, the compounding dynamic is not additive. It is exponential. A regime can survive sustained military pressure if its financial position is intact and its leadership is making coherent decisions from a stable psychological foundation. It can survive financial pressure if its military is functional enough to generate leverage and its leadership is intact enough to negotiate from some credible position. It can survive psychological pressure if its military can generate wins, if its treasury can still pay its forces, and if its leaders are visible, functional, and coherent. But when the military track degrades physical capability, and that degradation feeds the psychological track, which drives the leadership dispersal, which produces command fragmentation, which further degrades military responsiveness, which increases financial uncertainty around oil exports, which cycles back and amplifies the psychological pressure on a leadership that is already underground. At that point, the system is not under pressure. The system is in cascade. That cascade is what the transponder off flights are telling you. That cascade is what the calls for bombs on NATO summits are telling you. That cascade is what the bunker evacuations are telling you in a language that is more honest than any official statement from either side. The honest strategic assessment of where things stand as of July 10th, 2026 is this. The Iranian military, in its current condition, cannot generate a military response capable of materially altering the strategic trajectory of this conflict. Its air defense coverage is eliminated. Its radar reconstitution has been reset twice. Its naval positions at two of its most significant southern installations have been struck. Its senior leadership across two tiers has been removed. Its surviving command structure is underground, dispersed, and operating with degraded coordination. And the military force arrayed against it includes 20-plus warships, multiple carrier strike groups, F-35s operating from those carriers, a Marine Expeditionary Unit on an amphibious assault ship positioned near its most economically critical asset, and a refueling tanker fleet enabling continuous air power projection across the entire country. What Iran still possesses that cannot be dismissed is its remaining ballistic missile inventory and its drone force. These are not trivial. Iranian ballistic missiles and the drone capability demonstrated in previous campaign cycles represent a genuine and specific threat to American assets in the Gulf theater, to Israeli territory, to commercial shipping infrastructure, and to the energy installations of American regional partners. A regime that is militarily degraded, financially threatened, psychologically destabilized, and command fragmented, but that still has missiles pointed at carrier groups and proxy forces spread across 4 countries with varying degrees of remaining operational connectivity to Tehran, that regime cannot win. But it can cause catastrophic damage in the period between when it concludes the end is coming and when the end actually arrives. That interval, that specific window, that is the structural risk that serious analysts are tracking right now above every other variable. Not whether the outcome is in doubt. It is not. The question is what a cornered and fragmented command structure does when it crosses the psychological threshold from managing a crisis to believing the crisis is terminal. At that threshold, the calculus changes entirely. The decisions that get made in that window do not follow the logic of rational state behavior, because rational state behavior requires a state that believes it has a future worth protecting. And when that belief collapses, what replaces it are final calculations. Maximum cost, maximum damage, every available instrument used before the capacity to use it disappears. The Iranian government calling for bombs on a NATO summit is not the statement of a regime with a strategy. It is the statement of a regime that has moved from strategy to something else. And the officials who made that statement are now in bunkers in northeastern Iran, having flown there on aircraft with their transponders off, hoping that the distance and the concrete and the depth underground are enough. 2 days ago, as of today, July 10th, 2026, a set of aircraft climbed out of Marabad airport, extinguished their transponders, and turned east. The people aboard those aircraft represent the surviving leadership of a government that spent nearly 5 decades constructing itself into the dominant military and political force in the Middle East, building a proxy network that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea, funding and equipping and directing non-state armed groups across the entire arc of the region, sustaining itself through the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever applied to a mid-sized nation, surviving the deaths of senior leaders at various points over the decades, and presenting to the world an image of an institution that could endure any pressure and outlast any adversary's patience. Those people are now airborne with their transponders off, headed east, trying to get underground before the next wave arrives. They know what is coming. They know it with enough specificity to abandon their posts and move. They know it with enough urgency that they did not file flight plans or broadcast their positions or take the standard protocols that make airline travel visible to the world. They flew dark, fast, and silent toward the deepest bunkers they have. What comes next? What the next strike package looks like, whether the order comes for Kharg Island, whether Level 3 of the Iranian command structure survives what follows, and what decisions get made in the interval between the moment the regime concludes, its end is imminent, and the moment that becomes operationally true, none of that is resolved. None of it is settled. The tankers are still looping over the Mediterranean. The Boxer and the Abraham Lincoln are still in position. The 20 warships are still operating in the Gulf. The F-35s are still flying off carrier decks into threat environments that their predecessors never faced. And somewhere in the hardened underground facilities built into the northeastern mountains of Iran, the surviving leadership of the Islamic Republic is waiting, dispersed and isolated and fragmented, for what arrives next. Whether what they built underground is enough to survive what is coming from above, and what they decide to do with the missiles they still have in the moment they conclude it might not be, is the question that defines every hour of what follows from here.